Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Manoj. And I'd like to thank the Providence team for giving me this opportunity. Let me jump straight into the fray. It's like, I've got some 10 minutes extra, but I don't have enough slides to cover 25 minutes. So this is a sort of tactic.
No, Santosh will come back. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. So you plan to push me out after 15 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
So this, you've given me very clear-cut topic to talk on. I'm supposed to talk only on three things: glycemic control, RAS blockade, and SGLT2 inhibitors. So we will discuss three cases today. All of them are hypothetical because it's very difficult to find clear-cut cases in nephrology. First, we will look at a young male who is diabetic, who's normotensive, with a normal creatinine clearance and severely increased proteinuria. That is what albuminuria, macroalbuminuria is now called. It's called severely increased proteinuria. We want to know what to do about his glycemic control. Do we give RAS blockade? And what about SGLT2 inhibitors? Now, the impact of intensive therapy for diabetes is basically based on 4 studies. I don't want to, I don't want to take these to an endocrinology team. It's like, you guys would be better at talking about all this. So the 4 studies, all of them have consistently shown that intensive therapy for diabetes is important in decreasing microvascular complications, including diabetic nephropathy. But it has not demonstrated a consistent reduction in cardiovascular death or in mortality. So that is a downside of it. Now in this patient, because he's young and he has only, even though he has severely increased albuminuria, the level of proteinuria is relatively less compared to other patients. So HbA1c target of 7 or even 6.5 is advocated in a near normal GFR. So we have got that down. So we will target the lowest possible HbA1c in this patient. Now there are, regarding RAS blockade, most of the trials in type 2 diabetes have been with angiotensin receptor blockers. We have the IDNT, the Renal, IRMA2 and MARVEL. All of them are ARB trials. We have a MicroHope, which is the sub-study of HOPE done with Ramipril. But most of the conclusive studies have been with angiotensin receptor blockers. So IDNT have conclusively shown that irbesartan decreases the risk of progression to advanced nephropathy, not only compared to placebo, also compared to another antihypertensive drug, amlodipine. And this effect is irrespective of the level of BP control achieved. So that is a very important outcome of the study. Same has been proven with higher doses of irbesartan in the IRMA2 trial. Also in renal, the effect of losartan on renal and cardiovascular outcomes. It has shown a decrease in the primary outcome in the doubling of serum creatinine, end-stage renal disease and death. Independently also in the progression to end-stage renal disease. So there is nothing, the MARVEL study which shows valsartan, this has been included so that this study shows a 30% reversal to normal albuminuria in patients on valsartan. So there is nothing negative about any of these studies. All of them show what great drugs angiotensin receptor blockers are. But we have to add a word of caution to all this when you're using them, especially in patients with renal dysfunction. We have to caution the patients about first dose hypotension. We have had patients who have a sudden hypotension. This was more following captopril, but can also be seen following first dose of other ACE inhibitors and also ARBs. So patients have even had falls following a first dose of these medications. Second thing to remember is a worsening renal functions. I'm not talking about this patient alone. An older patient who's being started on ACE inhibitors or ARBs, we have to be careful about worsening renal functions because many of them might have bilateral renal artery stenosis secondary to atherosclerosis. So their renal functions have to be monitored. Usually we monitor within a week, but the recommended follow-up is within 2 to
Dr. Santosh.
This all depends on the level of renal function. We have to follow up more frequently and earlier in patients who have higher degrees of renal dysfunction. Next to remember is an uncontrolled hyperkalemia. Many of these patients may be on diuretics, patients who are also taking potassium sparing diuretics are at a higher risk of developing hyperkalemia. So this always has to be kept in mind when a patient is started on RAS blockade. Cough is an important side effect of ACE inhibitors more than ARBs because of accumulation of bradykinin. And important thing to remember, this can happen even 6 months after initiation of ACE inhibitors, not just within a week or two. So this has to be kept in mind for a patient who has cough without any other cause. Also, in patients with advanced renal dysfunction, anemia is an important side effect because it can decrease the production of erythropoietin, RAS blockade. So worsening anemia also has to be kept in mind. And RAS blockade, both ACE inhibitors and ARBs are absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy because of effect on fetal kidneys. It can cause hypoplastic kidneys in the fetus. So absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy. So any woman in the childbearing age group who is on ACE or ARB, or who's being planned to start on ACRB, we have to advise against pregnancy and have to advise them to take appropriate contraceptive measures. So in what group of patients do we use ACRBs? What is the evidence? There is strong evidence to suggest use of ACE and ARBs in type 2 diabetic patients with hypertension and albuminuria. The evidence to use them in albuminuria with normal BP is not so high, but still around only about 3% of patients in the renal study were normotensive, and in the original IRMA study around 30% patients were normotensive. So there is evidence, but not as strong as in patients with hypertension. But there are other studies which have shown that in non-diabetic renal disease, retardation of proteinuria can prevent progression of renal dysfunction. So definitely ACE ARBs have to be given in patients who have diabetes with albuminuria and who are normotensive. As mentioned above, we have to monitor blood pressure, creatinine and potassium within 2 to 4 weeks. More frequent follow-up is advised for patients with advanced renal dysfunction, and stop if serum creatinine increases by more than 30% in 4 weeks. Now the thing to remember is the most important reason for worsening renal function is not a bilateral renal artery stenosis. It may be intravascular volume depletion, which is caused by diuretics. As you know, any patient with severely increased proteinuria will have significant edema, and any nephrologist or physician worth his or her salt would give the patient diuretics. So diuretics causing a worsening intravascular volume depletion is the most important cause of worsening serum creatinine. So a patient should not be denied the advantage of ACE or ARB just because the creatinine worsens. We have to rule out other causes of volume depletion, also other nephrotoxic drugs like NSAIDs or aminoglycosides, which are very often used by surgeons to treat diabetic foot. I've already talked about contraception in women. Now, another important thing, a patient has significant hyperkalemia. It should be managed medically first before deciding to decrease or stop ACRBs. First, we have to advise a low potassium diet, try using loop diuretics, then give potassium binding resins like calcium polystyrene sulfonate, then try sodium bicarbonate for advanced levels of CKD. And also, if the patient has somehow a nebulizer at home, somebody who's using a nebulizer, try advising them to take a beta-2 agonist by nebulization. Then decrease the dose of ACE and ARB, and if that also doesn't work, only then should we consider completely stopping ACE and ARBs. Now that we have got raving reviews about ACE and ARBs, we thought, okay, let's try combining these two drugs and find out whether 2 and 2 make 5. Unfortunately, we have found in the on-target study that telmisartan and ramipril independently was good, but a combination had a significantly high risk ratio, importantly for renal impairment. We were giving this for renal protection, cardiovascular protection, but unfortunately patients had significant worsening of renal function, also increased hazard ratio for cardiovascular death and any cause mortality. So on target conclusively proved that a combination of ACE, ARB, and or a direct renin inhibitor is not advisable, can be potentially harmful. Now about spironolactone or eplerenone, it can be used in patients whose EGFR is more than 45. It's not advised in patients with an EGFR less than 45, but it can be used otherwise. But again, the important thing to remember is about hyperkalemia. Now coming to SGLT2 inhibitors, they have wonderful actions on the kidney and on the heart. In kidney, it causes diuresis, natriuresis, and decreases the body weight, and it increases insulin sensitivity, so causes decreased insulin secretion. So it is a wonder drug as far as nephrologists and cardiologists are considered, and most importantly, decreases inflammation, which is the most important cause for progression of renal failure. Also in diabetes, it is a reabsorption by the PCD, proximal convoluted tubule, which is responsible for the progression of kidney disease. So SGLT2 inhibitors seem to be wonder drugs, which can prevent all this, so it protects the kidneys. And you know, when you see the boxes for protecting the kidneys, SGLT2 inhibitors seem to be checking all the boxes. Glucose lowering, body weight reduction, BP lowering, natriuresis, anti-inflammatory. It is good in almost all respects. So again, we think, okay, wonder drug. It can be combined with metformin for additional improvement in HbA1c, additional decrease in body weight, and further lowering of systolic and diastolic BPs. So again, wonder drug. So in this patient who has got type 2 diabetes, a normal blood pressure, proteinuria, normal creatinine clearance, the glycemic target would be very low. We would definitely be giving RAS blockade, and yes, definitely SGLT2 inhibitors. Going on to one more case, which is a middle-aged female with hypertension, severely increased proteinuria, and renal dysfunction. How do we go about treating this patient? The KDIGO guidelines of the previous year have still recommended HbA1c for patients with impaired renal function. Ideally to be done twice a year, but if you're planning to change medications, or if the target is not met, you can do up to 4 times a year. We know that HbA1c measurements have a lot of fallacies in patients with advanced CKD. High urea can increase the value. All the others like anemia, erythropoietin use, transfusions, all this what we do in CKD patients, all those can cause spuriously low values in HbA1c. Now, continuous glucose maintenance indicators are advised in patients when you have an absolute lab value which is not concordant with your HbA1c value. You have a high actual glucose measurement and a low HbA1c value means it may be a spuriously low value. So the actual blood glucose measurements are advised in such patients. Either a self-monitoring of blood glucose or continuous glucose monitoring, both of which are costly affairs right now in our country when we are not covered by insurance. And this also helps to prevent hypoglycemia. So many of our patients may not be able to do this. So we have to be very careful to use medications which have a low hypoglycemia risk. We have to keep that in mind. The alternatives to HbA1c are glycated albumin and fructosamine. Both are not very attractive because glycated albumin shows the effect of glucose control only over the past 1 to 2 weeks. And it's not reliable in many of the situations which is associated with chronic kidney disease. So not really a good alternative. And fructosamine, again, there are no standardized controls regarding advanced kidney disease. We don't have any normal values for advanced kidney disease. So again, not an attractive option. Coming to the use of SGLT2 inhibitors in established nephropathy, the CREDENCE trial was a landmark trial for us. And it again, you know, it underlined the fact that SGLT2 inhibitors were wonder drugs. It caused an increase in almost all the primary composite outcome, in all the primary outcomes, the composite outcome, the renal specific outcome, progression to end-stage kidney disease, dialysis, transplantation, cardiovascular, all-cause mortality. It was like, it decreased the incidence of almost all the outcomes in patients with established nephropathy. So you can see that the hazard ratio, or to the left of the line, it is showing a benefit in almost all the outcomes, and especially the renal specific outcomes. And this is a comparison of the different SGLT2 inhibitor outcome trials. There are dedicated cardiovascular outcome trials, dedicated kidney outcome trials, and heart failure outcome trials. So sub-studies were done on all the cardiovascular and heart failure outcome trials with respect to the kidney outcomes. And you can see in this, everything goes to the left of the line. So the SGLT2 inhibitors had a wonderful effect in protecting the renal functions. Not only the dedicated kidney outcome trial, all the other trials with sub-studies showed that there was a positive effect in retarding the progression of renal failure. Compared to DPP-4 inhibitors also, they had almost a 60%, two-thirds risk reduction, two-thirds reduction in serious renal events compared to DPP-4 inhibitors. So, but all good things have a bad side too. There are two sides to a coin. The disadvantage is you cannot use them. As nephrologists, we are all crying because we cannot use them in patients with significant renal dysfunction. As you all know, most of the patients in the initial stages of renal dysfunction are treated by physicians and probably not by nephrologists. So once we see the patient, the GFR will be too low for us to start SGLT2 inhibitors. Now, which one to choose? In a patient with if you're looking for a cardiorenal protection, either DAPA or CANA can be used. Heart failure, if a patient with heart failure, dapagliflozin is more preferred. And one small, not small, a significant side effect of canagliflozin is a risk of amputation. So surgeons who are dealing with patients who have a significant peripheral occlusive vascular disease, it might be safer to use DAPA as compared to canagliflozin. So that is one significant disadvantage of canagliflozin. So in this patient who has type 2 diabetes, hypertension, proteinuria, and impaired renal function, we fix a slightly higher target for glycemic control of 7%. Do we use RAS blockade? Yes. The interesting thing is there is no cutoff of creatinine clearance below which RAS blockade should not be used. So RAS blockade is advised for every stage of renal dysfunction. Only thing is the frequency of monitoring increases with an advancement in the level of chronic kidney disease. SGLT2 inhibitors, yes, you can continue if the patient is already on medications. You should not initiate drugs like, I've shown you the chart. Drugs like DAPA should not be initiated when the creatinine clearance is less than 45. In the CREDENCE study, patients more than 30 ml have been initiated on canagliflozin and have shown remarkable benefits. So even though the recommendations are not to initiate, we can initiate canagliflozin in these patients with frequent monitoring. And even if the creatinine clearance falls less than 30 but is remaining stable, you can even continue canagliflozin in these patients. Now I'll take one more minute to talk about an elderly male on maintenance dialysis with multiple comorbidities including heart failure. How will you treat this patient? This is a graph which shows a significantly increased chance of death, the hazard ratio of death when the HbA1c is brought down less than 7. So in dialysis patients, we usually target an HbA1c of around 8 and we try not to bring down the HbA1c to 7. So we target an HbA1c of 7.5 to 8%, but this target is brought down in younger dialysis patients. Some people around 50 years, because many of these patients go in for renal transplantation these days. So, and it has been documented that the higher the HbA1c, increased chance of retinopathy and neuropathy. So their quality of life will be significantly low even after transplantation if we do not give an adequate control of diabetes. This patient, do we give RAS blockade? Yes, but we have to be on our watch for hyperkalemia because this patient may also be on spironolactone if the patient is already has heart failure. So, and at a very high risk for hyperkalemia because the kidneys, the urine output is also very low. And we have to make sure that he's not constipated because if he has constipation also, which accompanies many dialysis patients, he will be at an extremely high risk of hyperkalemia. And SGLT2 inhibitors, they are contraindicated unfortunately. Had SGLT2 inhibitors been invented a while back before the patient lost his kidneys, probably he may not have ended up on dialysis in the first place. I would like to stress on the importance of individualizing glycemic goals. For younger patients with no comorbidities and no significant risk of hypoglycemia, we may target a very low, relatively low HbA1c of 6.5. And for patients who are at a risk of significant hypoglycemia with limited life expectancy or advanced microvascular complications, probably a higher target would be required. And in older adults with chronic kidney disease and patients on dialysis, a higher, still higher HbA1c might be ideal. Now, one slide showing pearls of wisdom for SGLT2 inhibitors. We should not use SGLT2 inhibitors in moderate to severe CKD. In pregnant and breastfeeding women, the risk is not known, so better to avoid. One important side effect is euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis. So in patients who are going to be exposed to severe stressful conditions like hospitalization, severe illness, surgery again, and other insulinopenic conditions, there is a risk of DKA, so should not be used. And we should be very cautious to avoid volume depletion, especially elderly patients. If the patient is on loop diuretics, any condition predisposed to dehydration, we have to monitor volume and maintain adequate hydration. Another risk factor, another side effect, adverse effect of these drugs are urinary tract infections and genital infections. So any patient who is, has a history of recurrent UTIs, especially complicated UTIs, we have to temporarily at least discontinue the medications. Also in patients who are unable to maintain a proper genital hygiene. Then in certain communities, there is a chance of fasting for 1 month, which can cause starvation or dehydration, which can again predispose to DKA. So in that situation, we have to temporarily discontinue SGLT2 inhibitors. Also, per se, these drugs have a low chance of hypoglycemia, but if you're going to use insulin or other secretagogues, the risk of hypoglycemia is high. So we have to titrate the dose. Thank you very much.